124A, here we go. Master the Will, welcome. We're going to first go through a bit of housekeeping. If you are interested in the leaderboard, join it with the code CW72. Q&A, as always, don't be afraid to ask. So again, this is 124A. Full workout, quick picks, or reveal, totally up to you. Without further ado, Madeline, I'm going to ask you to do the very first one.
And thank you for this first very helpful slide, which is, things we're not going to be showing the grid the way we commonly do. So this is just a little bit of a difference, as Li Meng said, a positive tweak, playing in ways to bring the wine home, make it more real. And these are 3 questions that, you can put your mind on if it wants to chew on anything regarding cool climate, alcohol level, and the issue of ripe and tart. So that said, I'm simply gonna plunge in and be true to this wine, number 1. And I think you can see the color against the white of my picture, but it is actually a true, I would call either pale yellow or straw. And it certainly has, at least in my light, which is pretty blazing, some, minor green glints and a little silvered edge. It appears to be the way it moves in the glass of medium weight. And per usual, I don't overwork it, moving it in the glass, because it's not going to give me more, generosity in the aromatics if I swirl it to death. So that said, on the nose and on the palate. So I'm going to go ahead and taste if you don't mind. Woo, that first hit of acidity is always bracing. So what hits me instantly in terms of perceiving and defining is the presence of citrus, and take your pick: fresh, tart, lemon, lime, a little bit of white grapefruit, not pink, not candied. And in terms of a secondary category of fruit, I would say tree fruit, notably green apple, green pear. And that comes through particularly on the palate. There's a little bit of a nectarine presence, but certainly underripe. And then on the heels of both of those, especially mid-palate, if you hold it on your palate, there's a little passion fruit and kiwi, but it's sort of to the left of sweet. It's not sweet. It's more sort of tart, verging into ripeness. Really pretty defined fruit that's led by citrus. In addition, aromatically, there's certainly a presence of citrus blossom, which, generally makes sense when citrus fruit is that prominent. So, take your pick, whether you want to call it, orange blossom, though I think there's a little bit of apple blossom in there too. I haven't made peace with using the word pomaceous yet, because I like the word apple, right? What can I say? I'm a simple human being. And then aromatically, in terms of herbs, the obvious, again, on the heels of this dominant citrus characteristic, there is lemongrass, verbena, those high-toned, super fresh citrusy herbs, maybe a little bit of, cilantro, maybe a little parsley. There's a green element to it, but it's not, it's not a strong pyrazine. It's more like fresh snipped herbs. I always think of like taking a super sharp knife out and chopping, Italian parsley, which is the only parsley I use. Maybe like I just mowed the lawn. On the palate, there certainly is a mouthfeel that is lean, and I'll get to the structure officially in just a moment, but there's also, again, mid-palate, my current favorite expression and focus. There is a smooth, leesy character to the wine, and you can pick it up in the flavor as well. There is, maybe a blush of, or a whisper of organic minerality, like an earthiness, but I think there's a strong inorganic minerality in the expression of saline sea breeze on the nose and on the palate, a salty character to it. Wine, I'm going to give it one more little taste. The wine, by any count of mine, has high acidity, and that's even after, taste number 2 or 3, where my palate has made peace with bracing acidity. So I would say high acidity. Alcohol is balanced, but I can feel it. So I had to choose, I'd say moderate plus, but in line. It's not, you know, pulling the wine. If I had to define the mouthfeel of this wine, I would say both lean, certainly, but with a richness mid-palate. The finish is medium plus, verging on long. I think this wine shows promise in terms of being age-worthy, and also its complexity, even in its youth, is medium plus. It's certainly, I would call it a highly aromatic white wine with bracing acidity, mineral component, long, and quality. Cool climate, certainly expressed in the level of acidity and the moderate amount of alcohol. You know, I called it medium to medium plus in terms of alcohol content, speaking to a moderate growing region and a moderate growing year, vintage. And the very interesting question, what makes a wine taste ripe and tart at the same time? Well, you can have, you know, fully ripe grapes that haven't been ripened unnaturally overnight and have had sufficient hang time. And you can have a grape variety that tends to run high in acidity unless it's in a particularly hot year or warm growing region. So that said, put your seatbelt on. We are going to the Southern Hemisphere. We are in, yes, you glimpsed it, New Zealand. We are on the South Island, the north part. We are in absolutely Marlborough. We are actually the Wairau, I'm always mispronouncing it, River Valley. And there's the river, you can see it. Definitely strong maritime influence, pulling breeze to the interior. It is, for the most part, a dry subregion. It has significant diurnal shifts. This is the motherland of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And I did mention grassy, but you know, I will tell you, if you had given to me this wine to me blind, which it wasn't, I, you know, knew what it was, I would strongly consider modern Loire Valley because of the mineral component. Also, you know, lack of sort of candied pink grapefruit, or, you know, that green bean element that you find in less expensive overcropped New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So there we are, the very north part of the South Island. I think the statistic now is like 90% of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is being grown in Marlborough. What's incredibly interesting about this wine, this is made by a 10th generation producer of, wait for it, Sancerre. This is the Bourgeois family. Isn't that cool? I just got chills thinking about it, you know, organically grown by a French producer in Marlborough. And we're seeing more and more of this. We would accept 19 or 18. It is a 19. So it's not born yesterday. It's fully expressive, balanced. And I think that shows in its length and its complexity. And okay, one of my colleagues, Wairau, am I pronouncing it correctly? Mm-hmm. Wairau, good. So French heritage, organically grown. And what else to tell you?
I just want to say kudos to Angel, for instance, or Elle, for guessing Loire, for putting the Sauvignon Blanc in there. I think that's the first question, Madeline, is why not Gruner? For those who guessed Gruner, got a couple of guesses here for Gruner. And really, what was it that makes it New World? Because we also had some guesses on Old World Albarino.
Yes, no, and I would say, you know, I like doing a simple broad stroke first. In terms of varietal, I think this wine is highly aromatic. I don't have to work at it at all. It, you know, meets me 3/4 of the way out of the glass. You know, there it is. There's no working to get that first blast of citrus, followed by certainly blossom, and then on the palate, that minerality. I would say that Gruner Veltliner would simply generally be a little bit more subtle, and it would show other vegetal elements like its classic expression, which I usually get, thank God, of radish, you know, that type of thing, and maybe a little bit of ginger. Albarino, you know, if to your nose today, the flowers were speaking more strongly, I can definitely see that, but I still think that the acidity is more compelling than most Albarino that I've tasted. Why not the old world, new world thing. This is a great snapshot of how, it's not always, light on, light off. I think I'm going to turn to my friend Tim to address that specific subject, because you had mentioned something about tennis balls and I wasn't following.
Yeah. So, New Zealand, this is actually a challenging Sauvignon Blanc if you're trying to pick a place for it, because to Lisa's point, it's not effusively fruity. And I think it's actually a lot of pyrazines in it, but it's very sleek, a little bit floral. But to me, New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, for whatever reason, if you put a screw cap on them, you have sulfur compounds. And here you have thiols and thiol esters. And I'm sensitive to that stuff. A lot of people don't even pick it up, but to me, it smells a little rubbery, and that, Ian's what is his description of a freshly opened can of tennis balls. So those are sulfur compounds, and that's what happens. Sulfur under a screw cap, even a tiny bit, with Sauvignon Blanc only for me. Okay,
that's really neat. Thank you for bringing that up, because I wouldn't have picked it up. I think because I think we're about the same age, but when I started, I forgave, buckets of sulfur, particularly in German wines, right? So I think I became kind of immune to it and accepted it. But the minerality is confusing, is it not? Because it's pretty strong.
I would also throw back to something that I think, is really, to me at least, evident in this wine, but also evident the more time you spend across Marlborough. Saying Marlborough in New Zealand is like saying Sonoma County, right? Or saying Napa Valley.
Right.
It's a big place, and within that you have multiple subzones. You have the Wairau, but you have the northern Wairau, the southern Wairau. You have what they call the southern valleys versus the northern valleys. And somebody made a comment, I'm not that coordinated to rub my head and do all this at the same time, that usually one can find more tropical notes in some of these New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, and that's usually a bird dog to Southern Valley warmer climate fruit, because that's where you get more of the tropicality. The Wairau itself, the northern areas of it, so not Kaituna, not Rapara, and the Awateri Valley tend to be more of that sort of a greener, sleeker, more heavy influenced element there. So my understanding is that this is a single vineyard wine and not sort of bought across the region like so many, particularly less expensive Sauvignon Blancs are. This is not a, this is again, a single vineyard area. And it's also, as I think Madeline pointed out before, it's got the sensibilities of Sancerre, the bourgeois family have got their fingerprints all over it. So they're going to interpret it. They're going to play up or play down specific elements to that. Henri is the man on the far left side there, the older gent, but doesn't look old enough to be everybody's father. That's amazing, or brother on the far left. But I think they bring that sort of sensibility in trying, not to say to sort of force a square peg into a round hole, but they have an idea of Sauvignon expression and how they want to do that. So not only did they probably seek out terroir that would give them a more mineralic, saline expression, if you will, but also probably looked when they were planting the vineyard, because I don't believe it was existent at the time, to plant to clones of fruit that would stress flavors that were more in their profile. So at once it is very Kiwi Sauvignon, based on probably appellation, but also based on point of view. And that's something I think that is hard to identify at times when you're looking for wine purely from the specifics of what is the varietal and what is the geography.
But, to your couple, 3 points, first of all, this is an estate. It's not like one teeny plot, and they have multiple terroir expressions within those. If you go to their website, they love speaking to it. Also, this isn't a mental concept on their point. This is 10th generation Sancerre. This is in the marrow of their bones, that is their end game in terms of flavor and fragrance profile. So I can't imagine them veering far away from that. And also, don't get too frustrated, but you can use this wine to really practice primal varietal recognition. However, like I didn't pick up nearly the amount of pyrazine Tim did. We're all different tasters. But know that it's a great example of this variety, and that all 3 of us would have been slightly baffled to place it somewhere specific.
Fair point.
Yes.
Fair point. Okay, great. So we're going to go on to wine number 2. We have 5 more wines ahead of us, so I want to make sure that we're staying on time. Evan, you're up.
Yeah, let's talk about this wine too. And if the first wine, to Madeline's point, was very aromatic and very jumpy, if you will, out of the glass, this one sort of is about a halfway meter. It's not quite as aromatic, but the profile of the fruit is very, very different. So right off the bat, the color speaks to a younger wine. There's some green glints to it. The color is sort of in that sort of strawish, yellowish kind of vein, but once again, don't get too caught up on it. And the viscosity on the wine is what I would call probably about moderate. You know, it's not showing superb heavy viscosity, but nevertheless, is it just sheeting down the sides of the glass either. As I smell this wine, I'm struck by a couple of different things. Number one, I love that term pomaceous, Madeline, too. It's sort of like a pomme, coming from the word pomme from French, but this wine definitely has sort of an interesting combination of things. There's clearly some citric elements here, but the citric elements are on the sweeter side of things, not as bright and razory as Madeline's wine was before, but I'm getting a lot more tree fruit here. So you want to call it pears, you want to call it apples, probably more on the golden and yellow side, not so much on the brown side of those things. Quince would be another one that sort of jumps out to mind here. And a little bit of tropicality, maybe a bit of that sort of juicy fruit-ish character, which, you know, it's interesting if you go up and look up the Wrigley family for juicy fruit. By the way, they don't give it out. It's kind of like the 11 secret spices in the Colonel's fried chicken recipe. But, you know, you can usually find elements of green banana. You can usually find elements of melon. You can find elements of sweeter citrus as well there. And they just sort of like thumb it up as a juicy fruit thing. But you definitely pick up little elements of that. But again, really getting the appley, quincy, perry sort of thing. Floral notes sort of reflect that as well too. Again, more of that apple blossom, perhaps a sweeter citrus blossom element there. Maybe a little bit of chamomile, like the tea, a little bit of orange blossomy kind of thing picking up there. Some sweeter herbal notes as well. Nothing super vegetative, nothing green here. Maybe you could argue there was a little bit of like candied ginger or something like that, the stuff that you chop up and use to make your gingerbread cookies, which you haven't started doing yet. You got to get on that program. It ain't that far away. The holidays and the cookies are coming. And there is almost a little note perhaps of a slight snap of something like that in there. As far as the rest of the palate goes, the wine has some minerality for sure. You can call it sort of a chalky, flinty, stony something, but there's something definitely going on there. The wine's acid level is bright, it's sharp, it's crunchy again, perhaps not as much in the nose as it is in the palate, but in the palate, it's definitely dry, and the acid is, I wouldn't call it bracing, but it definitely shows sharpness to it. It's long. I'm picking up a little bit more of that sort of chalky grit of minerality in the palate of my wine. And a lot of purity. I guess the other thing I would comment on, and I noted it on the first wine as well too, is that I always ask myself, coming out of it, is, you know, is this wine singing as a soloist, or is the wine singing as part of a choir? I.e., is it a blended wine rather than a pure wine? And this wine definitely has a purity to it and a singularity of nature to it. So I would say I would expect it to be a monovarietal. Dry or fruity? Again, fruity in the sense of dry being absence of sugar. This wine has no sugar. Fruity in the sense that it's providing sort of panoply of different kinds of fruits you might find in the fruit basket or fruit section of your store. That's fruity, although being dry. Definitely floral, definitely more in that kind of appley thing. Apple butter is a good call on that one too. And again, some stone fruit there. If it has stone fruit, it's not super ripe stone fruit. And the texture, I think, is more austere there. It's got sharpness, but it's not unpleasant. It's acidic without being Hasidic, so it's not a wine for Passover. But for that, never mind. People are not, no sense of humor today, but there is stuff going on there, and it's delightful, it's delicious, and it shows an interesting sensibility, which I will point out later to it. Thank you for laughing. And where are we going to go on this wine? The first place we were at was New Zealand, South Island, and all that. Here we're going over to Europe, and as we can see here, we're getting some studs there. We're ending up in France, and going to visit the Crème family, and the Crème family sits sort of in that mid part of the Loire Valley. in the area around what we would call Vouvray. So if you're picking up on sort of Chenin markers and that sort of, again, kind of appley, juicy fruit, chalky kind of thing would give that to you, that's probably where you are. The Carems are a very historic family. All they really do is Chenin Blanc. They do it as well in South Africa too, which is that sort of little piece of information I wanted to give to you earlier. So, you know, if you've ever had their other sister winery called Terre Brûlée, and Terre Brûlée is located in South Africa, I believe in Stellenbosch. I don't have my stuff here. And again, is a South African take on Chenin Blanc. So that's where we got it here. The pictures show you're sort of dead in the heart of the sort of center moving western part of the world, beautiful part of the world, home of great chateaus, great food. This is the epicenter of culinaria in France. Don't let the Parisians fake you out. French food really started in the Loire Valley and worked its way to Paris in terms of lots of interesting saucing. Yeah, somebody's mentioning a note that there could be a little bit of honey on there, and this is an area because of the proximity to the water and the weather often going from warm to moist to warm, where you can find a little bit of botrytis going in there. A little bit of botrytis can add some complexity to a wine, particularly in a dry wine style. Obviously, sweeter wines will have it as a delineating factor. Here you could just have a few clusters in here and there, which might add some interesting stuff there. So this is, as I said before, the Carems. Now the Carems do make several different Vouvrays. If you go onto their website, you'll notice a couple of, if you will, you know, lieu-dit or single parcel type of Vouvrays. This particular one they make, which they call Spring, speaks to, I think, the printemps and the fresh nature of it. 100% Chenin Blanc, of course, but it comes from various different areas around Vernon and Noisy that they purchase grapes from producers, or I should say growers rather, that they have got handshake long-term agreements from. So they're very, very fruit source specific, and they will work with the people that they know and love, and only work there. So you can see that the 1918, you know, there is starting to be a little bit of development, perhaps more in the color, more so than the acid. If this wine had any residual sugar per se on it at all that was perceivable, and if one or two of you are detecting 3 grams per liter here, you're better than I am. It definitely comes off as dry to me. You'd have to push it a little bit more to get that, but that's where you would start to see it. And they make probably about 5 or 6 different old world Chenin Blanc, Vouvrays, Loire Valley,
Right.
and Mont-Louis, different. You could see Mont-Louis and Vouvray literally set next door to each other and across the river from one another. Mont-Louis tends to have a little bit less definition and just more varietal character. Vouvray, particularly with those tuffeau and nearby flinty chalky soils, tends to express more of the terroir element.
Evan, I have a
Great.
question. This is not marked as a sec, but it certainly is.
Yeah.
Do they make, do the Carems make any demi-sec? And by the way, their Terre Brûlée from South Africa is absolutely dynamic.
Yeah, and within that, Vincent, who is well traveled and in fact met his wife Tanya, who is South African, during one of the harvests. He worked a couple of harvests over there, and obviously decided he was going to commit to South Africa and commit to Tanya as well too. Speaks to that. Haven't gone through honestly their website in a while. I know they make varying sugar levels. I don't know if they make a super sweet wine. I don't seem to recall that. I do believe they make a slightly pétillant wine as well too, but I know their sole focus, that is obviously Vincent on the right and Tanya on the left, is exclusively in Chenin Blanc, be it in South Africa or be it in the Loire.
Great. All right, Tim, on to you. Wine number 3.
Okay, on to the first red wine. Here are the questions for you to consider as we go through the whole tasting process. What does a translucent color tell you about the grape variety in terms of, you know, a lighter pigmented red grape, thinner skin, deeper pigmented red grape, thicker skin? You can even extrapolate that to what kind of places are thinner skin grapes grown in versus thicker skin in terms of climate and average temperature. Second point, what countries have, or places I should say, have one foot in the old world and one in the new world, and that's in regards to style. Okay, and then finally, could you drink this red wine with tuna or salmon? Or could you just drink it watching Monday Night Football, which can always be very important. Okay. So anyway, let's get right to it. Everybody, you hold your glass up, and if you've got this against a white background, you can see through it, hence the translucent part, okay? So maybe a lighter pigmented, thinner skin red grape. The color here is a very pretty ruby red with a dark pink fuchsia kind of rim. It moves pretty well in the glass. It's not a huge, full-bodied red wine. There's a tiny bit of staining on the tears, and the tears legs, viscosity, whatever you want to call it, medium plus. And then in terms of the fruit on the nose and palate, predominantly red, excuse me, things like red cherry, cranberry, pomegranate, touch of strawberry, all fresh and ripe, indicating youth, and that goes right along with the color of the wine too. A touch of black fruit, kind of blackberry and black cherry, also fresh and ripe. To me, there's no blueberry or boysenberry, that range of fruit, and no dry fruit. So again, everything about the wine speaks to youth and a lack of age, and also lack of extended time in oak. In terms of secondaries, there's a really pretty rose and even jasmine top note. And notice, you pull your nose out of the glass, because if you cram your nose in, you could miss the flowers completely. Okay, it's really pretty. On top of that, we've got a lot of secondary things, and a lot of them are green. So what strikes me most is there's kind of bay leaf, there's a little bit of green tobacco, black tea. It's like Assam tea or Darjeeling. And then beyond that, there's some herbal type things. There's verbena, a little bit of lemongrass. The earth mineral factor is not prominent. To me, there's much more fruit here. There, however, still is a dusty soil quality. And then there's a little bit of a hard rock mineral type quality as well. In terms of oak usage, it's a mix. It's predominantly used, but I'd say this is probably 30-70. It reminds me of French oak in that it's all, the spices are restrained. So it's all texture. You've got kind of an espresso bean and the teeth leaf thing again. And the finish is really persistent and long, really high quality. In terms of structure, I would go medium plus alcohol, medium plus acid, and the tannins are somewhere between medium and medium plus. But the tannins are very supple and refined and elegant. In fact, that's my impression of the wine overall. It's very elegant and very long. Okay, with that, what could it be? K, as we say in New Mexico.
As the world turns.
Yeah.
We're going north.
So I see that, with the California comment, we're definitely in the new world. So folks, we're getting more new world here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're in the Willamette Valley, of course, which is one of the epicenters for Pinot Noir in the US. This is Evesham Wood. It's Eola Amity Hills, which is the furthest south from Portland in terms of the 6 AVAs, I guess 7 actually, and founded in 1986 by the Ramies. They sold it to the winemaker. His name is Aaron Nuccio in 2010, I think. And so they have a couple of vineyards, but they also buy fruit. Pinot Noir is really their mainstay. And this is, to me, their kind of a hallmark of their style. It's just elegance, finesse, a little bit more herbal than I'm used to in most Oregon Pinots. But yeah, I think just a complete wine. Evan, Madeline, what do you think?
You know what? I was listening to you because I love hearing both of you talk about wine. What really struck me is the first thing you said. If you go, quite often, especially if I get confused, I go back to the structure. Structure and color can often set you free. But I think this particular brand of plenty of very finely grained tannins, it's drawing, but it's like the finest sandpaper. Also, what's interesting about this wine that speaks to me, Oregon, quality Oregon, as opposed to somewhere else on the West Coast, it's not tutti frutti by anybody's measure. It's very well integrated. The fruit is expressively Pinot Noir, but well-mannered. It's not shoving strawberry and cherry up your nose. And, you know, the oak is so well integrated. They've been very careful about it. So, you know, Oregon
Yeah.
Pinot Noir, I think it's telling the story. It's just telling it, you know, gently. It's a very tender wine.
Yeah, I would say it would be extreme to say that Oregon is going through a bit of an existential crisis right now, as far as climates and a number of other things going on. But there are definitely camps that are sort of emerging, and it reminds me a bit of what we did in California several years ago, where you had people that were responding well to and rewarding the more extracted, bigger style with that, to your point, Madeline, really upfront, in your face kind of fruit, and pushing the alcohol levels, I might add too. If you go back to some of those bottles a few years ago, they were in the mid to, God forbid, high 14s. But I think what this wine does is sort of back to the future a little bit, in that, 13% alcohol. Temperance Hill is a great old vineyard. And I think what they're doing here at Evesham Wood is really stressing that, we used to talk about Oregon as being sort of a tweener style that was not New Zealand, but it really wasn't California either. And it was somewhere kind of in between. And I think a lot of the notes, those greener, herbal, greener, structural notes that Tim talked about, speak to that element, but the brightness of fruit reminds one more perhaps of something like the Sonoma Coast or even the South Coast, and not so much the sort of fatness of the mid Russian River Valley and the Middle Reach areas, where it starts to get warmer and wines take on a generosity that this one has. 13% of wine's simply not quote unquote generous, and it picks up more on the structural subtleties and nuances there. And I particularly like this wine because it reminds me of what I love about Oregon Pinot Noir when it hits all of that. And it does have, that specificity of place. And that is, as we talk about individual vineyards being well known, Temperance Hill is a very good vineyard.
So a couple of questions here. I love this comment from Akeem. The honesty is great. And two people have talked about Gamay versus Pinot. So always getting confused between New World Pinot and Old World Gamay. Do you guys see that confusion? Can you see how that comes about, and how do you sort of stop yourself from going the Gamay route when you see a wine?
I'm going to jump in here because I can just feel one of my colleagues about to bring up, either carbonic maceration or, whole berry, and because I want to say, I can really understand why you would get confused with top Cru Beaujolais, because the reality is that they're made by traditional methods. There's nothing candied about them. So if we're talking about top, Cru Beaujolais, I can see it, and it can definitely be a ringer for, Pinot Noir from Burgundy a little bit further north. So I think that's a happy struggle.
Yeah, and increasingly, and we talked about it, I think, with a wine or two that we did in a prior kit, that you've got more and more producers, particularly in the crus, that are doing, more stem inclusion and stuff like that. So the techniques are becoming less about carbonic, or maybe more about, in these day and age, semi-carbonic with partial whole cluster and things like that. But true Gamay, in the most purity of expression, is going to be, for a lot of people, more of that sort of bubblegummy, strawberry, confected sort of character. What's interesting, though, is that I was just having written a chapter on something recently, is the sort of struggle with what we call Valdegay in California. A couple of producers, namely Jay Lord, does a good one. Valdegay, for a longest period of time, is a clone of Pinot Noir. Gamay Beaujolais was a clone of Pinot Noir, but Napa Gamay were all clones of Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is a very all over the place thing. So when you're talking about true Gamay, Gamay Noir au Jus Blanc, or black Gamay from white juice, the places where they make it are actually quite limited. Interestingly, Beaujolais, of course, is the heart and soul of all this, but one of the largest other places outside of Beaujolais where you're going to find the true clone of Gamay, first of all, note it'll always be called Gamay Noir, and not confuse people. But it's actually in Oregon, going back to, Myron Redford in the days of Amity. But there's a handful of people making really delightful Gamay Noir in Oregon today, often because the climate structures that permit for really good Pinot Noir literally permit for great Gamay as well.
So what about this green element? Is the green element something that you find in abundance in Oregon Pinots? Is that something that you expect in Oregon Pinot? Here's some questions here about, the green elements throwing Lisa off.
Um, I certainly associate some herbal qualities with Oregon Pinot Noir, but I think Evan mentioned compared to New Zealand, they just have so much more fruit. To me, and Evan pointed this out, this is a really restrained style for Oregon Pinot. And I agree, Evan, this reminds me of wines from a long time ago. There's several other calls for grape varieties here. So Nancy calling out Nebbiolo. So Nancy, the color would be more advanced and it would be more acidic and more tannic and more unfriendly. In terms of Sangiovese, kind of the same thing. Chianti Classico, there's great tannin in the front of the mouth. This wine's not tannic at all. And Chianti in terms of color, unless there's Merlot or Cabernet in it, which is legal, percentage, it's red. It's not this color of almost, purple. So.
If I could say one other thing for those people who are, and again, I hate to sound so self-serving, but if you're interested in understanding the differences of Pinot Noir between Oregon and California right now, we have a couple of kits on the website, the 12 days of Pinot right now that are out there. There are 6 selected Pinots from Oregon and 6 selected ones. And if you go through those 2 kits, you will walk out with an incredible understanding of the nuance there. But I do think California, very simplistically, trying to get back to what Madeline was saying, what's it all about? Simplistically, California is going to be more about fruit, and the ones in Oregon tend to be more savory, just in general, unless they're really expressly and intently looking to push the fruit harder. They're just not naturally as fruity as ours, which is why they closely resemble New Zealand as a New World area more than they would California.
Okay. So, before we get started, here's some questions to consider. Once again, the color and the last wine, Pinot Noir translucent, you could see through it. You take a look at this, not the same thing. Does the aroma remind you of dark flowers like lavender and violets? Okay, but just so you don't, get a little compulsive about the floral thing, it's only a tiny part of this wine. Okay, there's a lot of other stuff. And then the quality of the tannins, excuse me, are the tannins, abrupt? Are they harsh, or are they pleasantly drying? We will find out shortly. Okay, holding up the wine so you can see it. Yes, this wine is opaque. You can't see through it. It is purple ruby. It has a very narrow, really deep purple, reminds me of high school, rim edge. Okay, gotcha, Evan. And so what else about it? The tears are heavily stained. And the wine is pretty rich in the glass. So the tears, legs, viscosity, Marangoni, whatever you want to call it, is high. Okay, all right. On the nose, whoa. So the wine really pops out of the glass, and there is as much secondary, and especially there's a profound earth quality to it that jumps, but there is really dark fruit predominantly. There is some red fruit, but it's very ripe, almost baked, and we'll call it cherry and maybe cranberry. And then black fruit like cherry and plum and berry, but again, ripe, almost baked. And then there's some blue fruit as well. Again, more like blueberry jam. So, and from there, there's definitely a floral top note. So that hits the second bullet point. And beyond that, there's really savory things. So there's black licorice, excuse me, some red licorice. What else? Very mushroomy and earthy. Yeah, but again, what I think very stony mineral too, especially on the palate. So again, the middle of the wine to me is the most intense part of it, in that it's all dark earth, mushroom, mineral, hard rock. There's, again, other savory things like sarsaparilla, almost like root beer, dried meat. And then from there, it's the oak here is used predominantly. And the structure of the wine, the alcohol is right at high, probably right around 14%. And the tannins are, I wouldn't say Nebbiolo Petit Syrah high, but they are medium plus, little aggressive. And the acid is medium plus, okay? So, and the finish is long and powerful. So this wine makes a statement, but it makes a very, very intense statement in terms of the earth and mineral. Okay, with that, I've given you a lot to work with.
I love this wine, Tim. This is
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Me too.
And I think, Tim, you pointed to a lot of minerality here, and your first guess from L is Old World, so Rioja
Where are we
Tempranillo
going?
Reserva.
Whoa.
Yeah, so we are in the Douro Valley, home, of course, of where they make port. But, you know, in the last 25 years, they're making brilliant dry wines from the same grape varieties.
There's the
So,
river up on the top there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
What
see
a
the
And I've
Douro.
only been there in the
shot.
spring when it was green and pretty. So I've never been there, you know, during the season or harvest when it's hotter than New Mexico, you know. So this is Casa Farinina, which is the still wine arm of Ferrera Port. And you know what I like about Ferrera Port, Madeline and Evan, is that they're the only port house that declared that I found in my birth year.
Which gives them up extra points, right?
Nobody
Yes,
declared in my
absolutely.
birth year, so there you go.
Okay,
The
so
grape
here we go.
in
Once
Douro
again,
was
in
great.
the Douro.
Mhm.
And Evan, you've been here, right?
Yeah, no, the Douro is a special spot on earth. And what's really cool about it, if you ever find yourself, for whatever reason, in the town of Oporto, two things. Number one, realize that the town of Oporto and the wines themselves only have a tangential relationship to each other. Wineries all have what they call lojas there, which is where they age the ports and let them spend time in oak, particularly for the older tawnies, but even by law for the, or in bottles for the vintages before they do it. But the lojas themselves have really nothing to do with production beyond the man element of it. You have to go up the Douro River, which drains down in the city of Oporto, if you will, where you go out to the ocean, and then you that's where you're going to see where the fruit is, and it's broken up into the Baixo, or the lower Corgo, Sim Corgo, and Douro Superior, which is the area where you get up into the highest altitudes in the mountains before you literally go over to Spain. All the sweet spot of the Douro Valley is the Cima Corgo, which is where all of the port houses have their, you know, single quintas and things like that, and it really is able to produce some incredible wines. It's almost always a band here, which is to say that rather than speaking from the singularity of one particular grape varietal, most wines are usually going to be blends of 4, 5, or 30 or 40, because oftentimes they have no idea what's actually in that older vineyard. It's just a pure field blend. So even though Touriga Nacional gets the most play, it's not the only grape in town. And although it will add to Douro blends what, say, Cabernet Sauvignon will do for a Bordeaux in terms of being complex and interesting and all of that, by itself, it's kind of like, I don't know, Daryl Hall without John Oates. It just doesn't work for you, right? You want to have the band there, and whether it's Touriga Franca, Tinta Cao, Tinta Roriz, you know, Tinta Amarela, all of the other related varieties come together to make the band what it's all about. And I don't know the specifics of what goes into Calabriga, but Calabriga,
I can tell you.
yeah, is this one of the top end wines that Ferrainha makes. This particular wine, and I'm sure it's because we bought the wine, but it scored in the top something in the Wine Spectator recently, and made like a, you know, top list. But I love the rusticity of it, yet at the same time having all the fruit. I love the savory nature of which Tim hit all of the key elements there. Those lightly herbal characters, those slightly more just sort of rustic things, and that flower element, which is that there's something called Esteva, which is Esteva, Esteva, which is actually the name of a wine that Ferrainha makes as well, which means rock rose. And it's really hard to describe. It's at once savory, but also floral at the same time. And it gives you that character, which is sort of uniquely Douro, although you do find some of it in Spain, Esteva. It's not nearly as powerful as it is there. I actually keep some Esteva leaves dried in my drawer to remind myself at times what it smells like, because it's such uniquely aromatic and arguably sort of this intoxicating herbal aroma that for people who like sort of those top end bitter but sweet but floral notes of like Amaros you get there, that is a little bit of what Esteva is all about. And all the vineyards are, you know, on these like ridiculous slopes and patamares, those sort of platformed structures that you see there.
These are great. These are great pictures of Casa Farinha. It's truly Douro's landscape is truly this amazing. Tim, quick question for you from Akin. What about this GSM blend? You know, could there be some descriptors that would have led you to GSM, and how is it different from GSM?
Yeah, that's a good question. What's missing here is all the peppery, savory qualities that you get in Rhone grapes. So black pepper, white pepper, but the sanguine qualities, dried blood, roasted meat, beef jerky, things like that. And and more red fruit with Grenache than here. And the earthiness here in the stony part of it is just profound. It's really powerful, and it's different from the Rhone.
Mm-hmm.
It's
You know
schisty.
what you said, that rock rose thing is spectacular, because I get dried flowers, not just on the nose, but on the palate as well. And interestingly, like Tim said, there's significant tannin in this, but oddly, you accept it. It doesn't shut the wine down. Ditto with the alcohol. It's higher, but it works. So 2 takeaways for me in tasting this wine, and I love Douro Reds, love them. They're revelatory. Don't worry about nailing them. It's just an issue about being able to assess them. You pick, you're looking at a wine that's concentrated, that has an incredibly strong mineral element, that has, dark fruit, blue fruit, or florality to it. And, we're not even talking about oak. It soaks it up like a house on fire. There's probably not a lot of new oak on this, Tim, right?
No, very little.
It's used out 75% French.
Yeah.
Just a couple of other pointers here. The nature of the dried floral thing, though, it's not as sweet and perfumed as potpourri. It definitely has other elements there that are more like wildflowers or herbal flowers or stuff like when rosemary or thyme starts flowering out. You get those sort of interesting herb flowers thing. Esteva is this other thing here. It should be pointed out that Luis Sotomayor, who you can see there handsomely on the left side, is also the gentleman that makes their quote unquote top end wine, which you might have heard of before. A little thing called Barca that they actually make and own as well too. This is not the same vineyard that goes in the Barcavelia, but this is the same vineyard that goes into Quinta da Leda, which is the top other wine that they make too, which is also a spectacular wine too. But this is a wine that's always been a favorite of mine. I think it represents a ridiculous price-value relationship. And I do think that if you like big red wines and you're discouraged by the prices of Bordeaux and you're discouraged by the prices of Napa Valley Cabernet, and you want something that you can put in your cellar for 15 or 20 years and will age gracefully and with complexity, Douro Reds are the most underrated red wines in my esteem for blended style wines anywhere.
$40 buys you a lot of wine.
Yeah.
And somebody mentioned mole. Bravo to that.
Agreed. All right, so we're gonna go on to the next wine number 5.
Yeah. Well, let me go in here, and this wine also, it's not as dark as Tim's last wine, but not as light as the other wine was. So you're kind of a little bit of a tweener there. Definitely has some purple notes there and a fairly purple vibrant edge, sort of purple ruby color, but extract, but not super extractive. What's interesting here, and some of the things you should think about as you're going through this and you're starting to smell it and do it, is we divide the world of darker fruited wines, if you will, red wines, into red fruit, blue fruit, and black fruit attributes there. Red fruits are generally going to come from cooler climates or certain grapes that have a thinner skin and a redder nature to them. Blue fruits somewhere in between, and then the black fruits tend to be literally black in physicality, in terms of color, but also in terms of the suggestive fruit attributes that you get darker rather than not. So you might find one. In the case of like Pinots, they tend to be very red fruited. Gamay is very red fruited. You might find blue. Malbec in particular is known for having blue fruit, and then or even Zinfandel at times. And then you might find more black, which is probably more going to be true of like Cabernets and Syrahs and things like that, where they tend to be there. Earthiness is and stoniness are something that you find strongly. You go back to Tim's wine, you get a lot of it there. You smell this wine right now. There's some minerality there, but is it as much? And what gives that? And we can talk about that more later. And then obviously the effects of oak, older oak, newer oak, younger oak, larger oak. What kind of oak would you might think, if oak plays a role at all in this wine as you move it forward? So let's talk about it. Literally, I'm getting, as I suggested to you, some red fruit, some black fruit, maybe not so much blue fruit, but the red fruit here comes off to me as being sort of a cherry-ish character, maybe red plum skin, some red berries, some red currants as well. Not so much the sweet elements of red fruit, but definitely red fruit character there. And then the black fruit, I'm seeing sort of the flip side of the same fruits, but oftentimes black. So more black cherries, more black plums. I am getting some blackberries there as well too. I'm getting mostly fresh, but there's a little bit of that that like fruit leather character that you used to put in your lunch to kids' school. You know, you take the lunch, we call it, I don't know if they call it fruit leather, but something like that. But you get that sort of very extracted, slightly dried nature of it, but still fresh and bright. I'm definitely getting some herbal elements to it here, sort of sweet greener herb character to it, a little bit of sage, a little bit of laurel, a little bit of, dare I say, something almost sort of rosemary-esque about it, but not necessarily as profound as that. Picking up some tea leaf for sure. And then earth notes. I'm picking up some mushroom character here, but sort of in that refined sense there. Again, sort of a mineral, maybe a little bit of a graphite element to this wine there, but a real juiciness to it. There's just a succulence about this. And I think the succulence is actually coming more from the red element of it than the black element of it. So simply by describing the wine as being red, black, or red, black, and if somebody finds some blueberry in there, let's throw it in for good measure. I'd suggest to you that there's a range of things going on and possibly a range of grapes. So remember what I talked about before. Does it speak to you with a single voice, or does it speak to you as a rock band? And this is definitely more, you know, a band than it is, again, I'll go back to Daryl Hall singing by himself there. So let's go ahead and taste. It's a very interesting wine to have just off of the wine that we had with Tim, because whereas Tim wine had sort of these jagged edges and some of the schisty things and the harder, more, dare I say, astringent tannins, this wine has almost a polish across the top. It's like somebody who collects rocks like my son did when he was about 15, and you put them into those little tumblers and then they keep spinning around, and then over time they start to shine, and then you put them in the fine tumbler and you've got these things that look like jewels, although they're rocks, and you pick up a little bit about there. The tannin management on here is very deftly done. There is pull, but the pull is not drying, it's not excessive, it's not hard. And it just drags a little bit there. I think that's part of maybe one of the grapes coming in here as part of it. There are some other savory elements to this wine as well too. There's definitely like a green peppercorn character to it. There's maybe a little bit of a paprika or smokiness to the wine too, but there's this really wonderful core of ripe fruit and a winemaking veneer across the top of this that sort of suggests somebody who really knows, pardon my French, what the hell they're doing across this spectrum of grapes and style of wine, and definitely a wine of intent. I mean, there's an idea behind this wine across its personality that speaks vividly in the glass. So we're going to go in the world, and the earth turns as the world turns, and we go back to California, and there we are down there sort of in the Paso area, and not super duper far from the water, but inland far enough to Tablas Creek Winery. And if you were thinking to yourself, God, it's Rhonish, but boy, it's also California at the same time. This is wine number 3. That is a blend of American and Franco, something going on here. So if you remember, our first wine had Sancerre meets Marlborough. Our second wine had well, Loire Valley, although they make wines in South Africa. And this is an American wine, but all of the budwood, all of the plant material from this comes from Chateau Beaucastel in France. Because if you're aware of Tablas Creek, you know that this is essentially a partnership between the Perrin family of Chateau Beaucastel and Famille Perrin, now taking over the entire southern part of France, along with the Haas family that actually got into the wine business sort of in a backwards way, having come from being importers with vineyard brands, bringing in some of the most amazing imported wines into the United States, and having this idea with the Beaucastel people, from whom they have a long-term relationship with, of finding a perfect spot to do that. You'll notice here that if you look to the map, to the picture at the right, there are a bunch of subzones here of Paso. We're not going to quiz you on all of them today, but Adelaida in particular is, I dare I say, it's my favorite. I'm a big fan of the Cabernet that comes out here. I'm a big fan of the bigger varieties, most notably Syrah that comes out of Adelaida. But this is your sort of classic wine. This wine is actually, I believe, mostly estate fruit. I do believe they augment it a little bit. I'm not 100% sure of that. And the wine's called Patelin de Tablas, and it is a blend of Syrah at about 30, little less than 40%, Grenache, about the same amount of Grenache and Syrah. So if it spoke to you with both a red hat and a black hat, that's for good reason. There's a little bit of Mourvèdre in there, and if you're picking up on a bit of bite and maybe a bit of bitterness and astringency in the back end, Mourvèdre can do that to you, more so certainly than Syrah, and completely different from Grenache. Grenache is what's providing all of that beautiful defined red fruit, that sort of weight in the middle palate. And then there's always that they call the secret ingredient. And the secret ingredient in the Rhone Valley for reds is Counoise. And everybody who is worth their weight in Châteauneuf-du-Pape will tell you that if you're lucky enough to have a little bit of Counoise accessible to you, that they can't tell you exactly what it brings there, although I find that it brings floral lift and a little bit of spice structure to it. But the wines always have an added, like 1 + 1 = 3 level of complexity that wines that don't have in it. Counoise was the thing that actually was one of the focal points when the Haas family started bringing budwood over, and they literally quarantined all this stuff. If you do any sleuthing in DNA sampling across Rhones produced throughout the Pacific coast these days, and you ask people where they got their budwood from, if it wasn't suitcased out of somewhere in Europe, God forbid, or maybe an old Alban clone or something like that, chances are that it's coming from the Haas family and it's coming from Tablas Creek, whether it's white or red or that. Jason and I were chatting about this wine because I told him we were going to present it. He was very excited. And he says this one is the one that he makes that he feels like is the bridge between the Northern Rhone and the Southern Rhone. And if you've had his pure Syrah before, it is very much in a Northern Rhone vein. And you have a lot of his other wines like his, Côte de Tablas and some of those other things, they tend to be more Southern Rhone in personality. And this one, he feels like he's got a foot in both camps there, and maybe by virtue of the grape breakdown, but also in terms of the personality and style. There's enough Northern Rhone clues, albeit grown in California. So you're not getting that like heavy Rotendon character of your Syrah, but it's still Syrah. And the Grenache obviously gives you a wonderful amount of red fruit there that sort of supports there and adds a lot of texture to it. And then everything else kind of fills in the gaps.
To your point, Evan, this, or Tim might have made this earlier, if you're struggling with this wine and you're sort of kicking yourself for not getting it, a simple question to ask you, and I would have had to do this one deductively, not by recognition. Is it a monovarietal or is it a blend? And I think it speaks more to blend than monovarietal. Also, I can really see where you'd be sitting there going, okay, let's do this intellectually. It's verging and translucent. What are we considering? Pinot Noir, Gamay, et cetera, et cetera. This is doesn't, to me, have a strong earth element, which nudges it into the new world, even though it's got a lot of old world influence. And also, I will say, this is not an easy one to get because it's polished. I don't mean in a sellout kind of modern way. Jason Haas knows, to quote Evan, what the hell he's doing. It's just beautiful. But it's, really balanced. The red fruit is very pure and tender. And I don't think this is necessarily an easy wine to recognize, though it is easy to appreciate. And I want to actually invite everyone, you can get so laser focused on what it is that you forget to just pull back, take a breath and look at it in terms of its structure and its quality and its expression of fruit. And all of a sudden, your memory might go, I'm connecting the dots.
Yeah.
A lot of, I think what we're trying to do is showing people that, the wine world is not, it's not stagnant and it's not monolithic and things are changing. And I think that, the style of wines that Tablas Creek speaks to today is very much a part of this emergent, it was not that long ago that that Randall Graham donned the Lone Ranger suit and went on the cover of Wine Spectator at his time when, the whole Rhone character of California was just starting to emerge itself. And a wine like this today shows how far we've come and how this sort of new world California version of Rhone, which is very different, by the way, than Australian version of Rhone, which is very different than Chilean or version of Rhone, because they're all doing their takes on Syrahs and to a lesser degree Grenaches and Mourvedres and things like that. But it really is a mature category in this thing. It's something that we should appreciate and really, see what they're doing. And it's great to show a producer like Jason, who's sort of a strong thing here. But again, think about what he's doing here. Think about where he is in Adelaide, slightly warmer, slightly inland. You're not going to find in the Syrah here that sort of coastal thing that you would find in, I don't know, Melville or Drew or something like that, where it screams pepper and meat at you. This is a slightly warmer climate Syrah. It's slightly more like the Syrah examples you're going to see fleshing out a Gigondas or a Vaqueras or something like that, which is not cracked black pepper per se. It's going to give you a little bit more roundness and more of the dark fruit akin with all those other things there. But delightful thing. And just to show you organics going on, you got owl boxes, you got sheep and stuff like that, and animals eating, and it's all that cool stuff.
All right, Madeline, my favorite wine of the flight, wine number 6.
Wine number 6, rock and roll. Okay.
Super excited about this one. Go for it.
Well, so the sweetness is to be considered, but define it, honestly to yourself, just the way you would structurally define acid and tannin. Consider the alcohol content. So see if you can isolate that and be very specific about it. It's important to get to know yourself in terms of someone who is alcohol sensitive, sweetness insensitive, etc. And honey may or may not be an element in the flavor or fragrance profile. And by the way, I will remind us all what our British colleagues told me a long time ago: fragrance is flavor and vice versa. Because when you can't smell, you can't taste, other than structure. So the first thing, this is very cool visually. And I have to tell you, I made a mistake. We make mistakes. I shouldn't have poured this wine out half an hour before we put the kit out, because I let it warm up too much, to be honest with you. But it hadn't occurred to me, this is maybe the first time, at least I've experienced on one of our kits, doing white wine at the end, but I will tell you, it's not going to hurt it. It's very expressive, no worries. So the color is gold. It is bright. It has got a killer sheen to it, and it's got orange glints to it. Also, it's actually adhering to the glass. It's not staining it, but if you, gently whirl it, that is not necessarily extract that's giving it its, the alcohol that it's giving it its weight. It could be extract and or, sugar. So, it definitely gives the impression, just visually, as something that's very rich. To remind us all, white wines darken with age, right? Red wines lighten with age. So this kind of golden color could be an indication of bottle age, barrel age, combo of both, TBD, right? And again, to remind us all, don't run to make conclusions visually, because it's one of the biggest mistakes we all make in, to quote Tim, that part of you, answering that part of you that's desperate to answer the question, what is this wine? So aromatically, oh, wow, talk about meeting you 125% of the way. So the first thing that strikes me is this wonderful combination of sort of honey and toffee, and also citrus, but, candied citrus, if you will, like tangerine, mandarin orange, Meyer lemon, stuff that's inching towards sweetness naturally in its aroma and its flavor. And I haven't even taken it on the palate yet. And the other thing that strikes me aromatically, and I'm curious if it's going to be on the palate, is a tropical element, notably banana. I'm going to go ahead and taste it. This is an example of a wine that I really invite you, especially if you've gone through it quickly on the first approach, take it back and hold it on your palate and get that plum line of flavor and get that texture, you know, after you sort of get the acidity out of the way. This wine has weight and absolutely reflects what the aromatic set us up for on the palate. There is, you know, additionally, apricot and peach marmalade, if you will. Banana is there, pineapple with its zingy acidity because the finish is lifted. It's very interesting to me that the attack is sweet, but then the minute you spill it or swallow it or spit it out, and I swallowed it a little bit because it's just a yum bomb, you know, the wine lifts, and those beautiful citrus elements that you got aromatically turn tart on the finish. How cool is that? So it really cinches the wine up. There's nothing bloppy or, you know, sloppy about this wine. If anything, the acidity is a surprise, and there's a slight welcome disconnect from the way it smells to the way it finishes. Go back to it, and aromatically and on the palate, if you think, you know, go back to the coffee, toffee, and drumroll vanilla expression. Absolutely, there's a new oak element to this wine. You're not hallucinating it, though it doesn't reveal itself on the finish. And when we talk about things like an earth element, specifically mushroom, and something I got immediately on the nose that I forgot to mention on my first go round to this wine was saffron. It speaks to botrytis. Though again, there's nothing sloppy or overdone about this wine, but the botrytis element is adding terrific complexity in a wine that is young, and I think holds a pretty impressive future. So if I were to define it, I would say it is sweet, but the acidity is medium plus. It is finishes mouthwatering. The alcohol is medium plus. I don't know what the number is. I can look at our little bottle and see what it's claiming, 13%. It's balanced. Mid-palate, it's round and smooth, and it finishes cleansing. It is long, it is complex, and I think it's going to get longer with bottle age. Very cool wine. I didn't even mention elements of florality, which are in there, both fresh and dried flowers in the form of, you know, honeysuckle, pretty flowers. And then back, maybe second, third, fourth, tertiary, etc. element is the earth, which is, you know, subtle. Maybe a little bit of gravelly minerality, but more like sort of that whisper of fresh truffles, always fresh truffles, and freshly snipped mushrooms. I just think that anything other than fresh truffles should not be legal. It's delicious, it's sweet, but it finishes refreshing. And I am very interested to see where you think it's coming from.
I love this question as we reveal from Jane. I have the same problem too. When a wine is this sweet, I find it hard to assess the acid. So Tim's given some points here, but Madeline, what are your sort of like
this is my C-spot run. This is where I really think it's so critical to get to know yourself as a perceiver of structural elements. First of all, where in your palate is acid perceived? It's perceived here. It's like sucking on a lemon. There it is. And secondly, with all the distraction of the sweetness and whatever the hell else is going on in the wine, to be able to isolate that, to assess it. You know, and sometimes it takes the second approach to do that. So like Tim said, salivary glands. And also when you have one dominant structural thing, like the sweetness, it's not unlike the structural command of, say, Nebbiolo, you know, where you have a hard time tasting through the wine. The beauty of sweetness is it doesn't shut the wine down, but you have to be very disciplined in sort of pushing that element away so that you can perceive the secondary elements.
Tim, every time I get yeah, thank you, Madeline. Every time Tim writes something in the chat, I feel like, duh, of course. Such poignant advice. New wood for Tokai is very infrequent. Brilliant. Okay, I love the guesses. We've got Tokai, we've got Riesling, we've got Muscat, and of course we have Sauterne. Andrea is going to take us there.
And we are going to France, to Bordeaux, to Sauternes. This is actually in Sauternes. It is just to the west of the River Garonne, and it's east of the famous appellation of Barzac. And Sauternes itself, and it is a small producer that's family owned and operated, dating back to, wait for it, 1855. Small production levels, and I think it's a great example of why we should be drinking more of this stuff, frankly, because it's so well executed. There's nothing cloying about this. This has got a shockingly high level of Semillon. It is well over 90% Semillon, and most Sauternes, if you were to poll them, are, you know, probably around, give or take, 80. Yes, food pairings. You know, thank you for handling that, Tim, because that was one of the things I was really excited to talk about. You can go, you know, you can go sweet, but you can go savory also. You know, there's a reason why it just melts into foie gras, because of the texture and, you know, hitting the salinity of the foie with the sweetness of the Sauternes, sweet and salty, baby, right?
Yeah.
And if you're going to do it with, I think, sweet foods, you want things that are more sort of savory sweet, or I always call them sort of biscotti level sweetness. I'm always begging chefs to pull back on the sugar. So high level of Semillon, which because of its thin skin is more susceptible to botrytis than Sauvignon Blanc. Though Muscadel, I think, if memory serves, is pretty susceptible to botrytis. And to remind us all, botrytis is the happy, positive, friendly rot that concentrates the all the elements in the wine, but notably the sugar and acidity and aromatics, and changes them. You know, because there is a pungency to wines that have been affected by botrytis that is hard to define, but absolutely recognizable, in addition to the way, you know, we described it with saffron and mushroom and truffle element. I just think this is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful example. And somebody noticed price value relationship. You know what, if I can just say this, as a massive component of Master the World, because they've been letting me play with them now for what, 2 years. I just think that, you know, picking out good wine, a lot of the game is price value relationship. And this wine way over delivers in its price point, the way the Douro did. So thank you for letting me opine.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a treat to be able to go into the holidays, and, you know, the world doesn't drink enough Sauternes. Let's just put it that way. The world does not drink enough dessert wines. I encourage you, for those of you who do have a couple of special bottles of dessert wine at home, you've got 2 events coming up that are great opportunities to bring them out. Christmas table is probably my preferred. I tend to be way too drunk at the end of New Year's Eve to remember what I had. So I tried that with dessert wines one year. It didn't work out. But this is Sauternes is a treat with so many different desserts, older ports, tawny ports, Tokai, somebody pointed out earlier. But enjoy your dessert wines with the people you love and you want to be around. And after you've had your second or third slice of pie or persimmon pudding or whatever it is that you like to do at the end of the meal, do that. I just wanted to give a shout out to this little property, because, you know, not everything is going to be Chateau d'Yquem or Chateau, you know, La Folie Pédaguet or whatever. There are some little guys out there making some delightful wines, and because of that, they're, you know, they're not necessarily as well known. They don't command as many prices, but they really deliver on the quality. I think that as Madeline mentioned, you know, high levels of botrytis and high levels of Semillon with a little bit of bottle age will always give you a color that's more mature than it actually is. The difference between late harvest and botrytis is oftentimes going to be reflected in both the color of the wine, but also the nature of the acidity balance. Because think about it, when botrytis affects the grape, that noble rot that Madeline spoke about, it's like all these little spores go into the grape and it sucks out the water without raisinating the grape. So the skin changes, it gets that gray, you get these honeyed character. And while the actual water leaves as the mold takes over, the actual balance of acid and other things like that in the grape doesn't change itself, which is why you sit there and you go, oh my God, how can you have all this lushness going on, but with acid level that is balanced and it doesn't feel like clunky or top heavy or cloying or anything like that. And botrytis, more so than late harvesting. Big difference there. Late harvesting is raisinated grapes. Sugars go up, but acids go down. Whereas botrytis doesn't affect acid balance. So I always prefer my
Beautifully
dessert
said.
wines.
No.
That is a beautiful statement. I love
Also, in terms of another food option, don't forget the most obvious salty, sweet, cheese, dessert wine. Hello. Especially if you're not a pie person, right? And you need a little bit of that sugar on your palate, but you can put it with, I mean, I know this is, too indulgent for words, but triple creme or triple creme blue vein with Sauterne is my idea of a stupid good time.
Yeah, and
Stilton.
Yes, Stilton is good. And Roquefort, of course, is classic and relatively low.
Or Gorgonzola, because it's a little bit softer and it's not
also
as dominant.
Yeah, and if you wanted to sort of not go purely on the cheese thing, doing some like simple poached fruit, like poached pears, some cheese and Sauterne is a lighter, but nevertheless delicious and appropriate finish to a meal. So.
We need to do this cheese and wine class. We really do.
Oh, I want to listen to it.
Anyhow, we are now at the top of our hour. Love to hear your feedback on the kits. If you enjoyed this kit, I know Evan, this guy here, has had a hard time sourcing all our wines. It's been a tough ride this last year, 2021. Just all around and about to get harder.
Yeah,
so
it's like whack-a-mole out there trying to buy wine right now, as Madeline and Tim both know too. You want something, you go in there and it's like, well, it's like, you said last week you had it. Well, that was last week and now it's this week. You said you had 9 cases. Well, now I have 1. What about 8 cases? Yeah, it's crazy. So we're happy. We work hard for you to bring these to you, and we do hope you enjoy them.
We hope you enjoyed. Help us spread the word. If you're looking for gifting options, you have about a week left. So come to our site. We have a lot of options. We have the French kit for the wine lover in your life who wants to try to figure out more about wines. The next seminar that's coming up, we're shipping this week for those of you who are annual subscribers. For those of you who are monthly subscribers, you'll get that as your monthly subscription comes up. 125A is now shipping in December, and January 20th is when we have our next webinar.